The hammer comes down hard in the second episode of Luke Cage, as the titular hero for hire is thrust into a world that he wants nothing to do with. And unfortunately, it's going to be the death of a friend that causes him to become the Power Man himself. The second episode of Luke Cage was absolutely fan-freaking-tastic. What I really loved about this episode is that it's going to be like the turning point for the entire series. It's basically the straw that broke the camel's back. Luke Cage no longer has any excuse but to get involved with the things that are going on in his neighborhood, in particular because of the actions of Cottonmouth, who was just amazingly terrifying in this episode. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it right now. That scene towards the end where he decided to throw his goon off the top of a roof as he slammed into a car was brew-freaking-tull. Cottonmouth brought out the fangs this week, and it was awesome. But arguably one of the biggest things that went down in this episode is that, unfortunately, Pops, the owner of the barbershop, was killed by Cottonmouth's goons in an attempt to get the money back from Chico. This scene left my jaw on the floor. I was not ready for Pops to be killed. However, there were some pretty important death flags in this episode, seeing as how we got to actually learn about the backstory of Pops. Apparently, he was a would-be gangster back in the day before he decided to be a respected member of the neighborhood, and he actually ran with Cottonmouth. And little interesting fact, his name is Pops not because he's old, but because of the sound it would make when he's popping yo ass. The scene is all the more tragic in that it never really even needed to go down this way, because what happens is, throughout the episode, Luke is actually looking for Chico, who has the other half of the money that they stole from Cottonmouth and his guys. And eventually he gets him to come back to Pops' barbershop. They're going to keep him hidden in the back, and they're going to try to sort of facilitate some sort of like delivery so that they can give all of the money back to Cottonmouth, and so Chico can get away unharmed and not get killed like his other friends in the previous episode. And it seems like something that Cottonmouth is willing to do, as he seems to have a lot of respect for Pops. He actually used to run with him back in the day, and they sort of have this like estranged cousin-like relationship between the two of each other, where Pops necessarily isn't going to run with Cottonmouth, but he's not going to turn him over to the police either. It's basically just sort of looking the other way. They have a past, and they take that very seriously. Cottonmouth even says there's a lot of rules to this type of thing. Even gangsters seem to have their own sort of creed or code. The problem is, one of Cottonmouth's goons made an executive decision, as he said. He decided that they were going to go to the barbershop and just completely light the place up. So him and Shades go to the barbershop, and he brings out these two Uzis and just lights up everything, destroying everything, killing Pops, shooting other people, with Luke Cage unfortunately not able to protect Pops because he had to save this kid by actually shielding him with his body. This is a really important scene for a number of reasons. One, it shows that Luke Cage is not afraid to be a hero. And two, it's also going to lead to the fact that Misty Knight, the detective, is going to start to realize that Luke Cage is some sort of superhuman being. And speaking of Misty Knight, man, was she fantastic in this episode. But she also just happens to be a pretty solid baller. There's a great scene where they're going to these guys who are playing at a basketball court, and they're trying to get a little bit of information, trying to find Chico, and she plays horse with this one dude who she completely just annihilates. But later on in the episode, they end up going to Pops' barbershop. It seems like everybody was going there in this week's episode, and she finally gets to see Luke Cage again. And I love how it's so unceremonious. Like, there's not really that much tension. Luke just sort of walks out, he realizes that that's Misty right there, and he knows that she's not an auditor, but indeed a detective. And I love how he's sort of basically giving her the third degree. You want something more to happen and it doesn't happen, but by the end of that episode, she realizes that he was shot multiple times, but has no damage done to him. She's starting to question everything she knows, and she's becoming even more intrigued by the mystery that is Luke Cage. So let's talk about my favorite scene of the episode. So, Pops is dead, they get the money back, and they decide to bring it back to Cottonmouth. Now, this young goon who made this executive decision thinks like he's the shit. Like, this was the best thing that should have been down. They should have been popping from the beginning and getting loud. The problem was, Cottonmouth did not want Pops to get killed, and he was willing to let this whole thing go as long as he was fine. Hell, he was going to even help him rebuild the barbershop. But because there are rules to this kind of thing, he decides to actually kill this underling by grabbing him and throwing him off the side of a building where he slams down on top of a car. This scene is important because it shows how increasingly sadistic Cottonmouth is becoming. Not to mention, I love the fact that throughout the episode you can see that he's sort of slowly corrupting his cousin, where it doesn't matter where you get the money from. As long as it's green, the money is good. And by the end of the episode, she seems to view things in the same way, even though despite the fact that she doesn't quite approve of murder. And even Shades manages to make it out of this episode just fine, a lot of that doing with the fact that he didn't want anything to do with that whole, like, drive-by situation. He didn't want to have to kill all of those guys, and he was shocked that that went down. Not to mention, he's also working for Diamondback, and he's sort of his errand boy. You don't want to mess with him. Pops is dead, Cottonmouth is killing people, and Luke Cage no longer has a choice. He's going to have to become a hero and save the streets of Harlem. So what's the rundown on the second episode of Luke Cage? Another episode that just sucked me in like a vortex of awesomeness. What I really loved about this episode, too, is just the social commentary on it. How the entire episode was bookended by this scene with Luke Cage ominously standing in this park across the street from a monument, and he starts to get mugged by this young kid who's got a gun right up to his head. And Luke Cage basically just turns around, takes the gun from him, and points it right at his stomach and shoots him just to freak this kid out and to prove him a point. And this scene is so important because of how relevant it is for the things that are going on in the world today. It's very stark and very realistic, and something that sort of separates it from the other Marvel Cinematic Universe works. And I really appreciated it. This whole series in general can go to some pretty dark and gritty places. A lot of those scenes definitely involve the character of Cottonmouth, who I think is a really great villain, not because he's like super powered or anything, but just for how slick he is, how just menacing he can be. The scene where he goes to the barbershop and gets a shave is so damn tense because they're just there looking for the money in Chico, and you can tell that that's what they're there for. He's not even afraid by the fact that people can see all of the freaking scars on his knuckles from all the people he's been beaten over the last couple of days. He's that confident in his villainy, and something about that is just damned intriguing. Not to mention the interactions between him and Luke Cage are just so awesome. I love the scene where Luke is going over to the club to try to facilitate with Cottonmouth about doing a trade for the money, and he's already quit his job before he walks in. And as he's leaving, Cottonmouth tries to fire him, but Luke Cage just fires back with a quick, "You can't fire me. I already quit." That was hard ass. I think Spider-Man's Uncle Ben said it best. With great power comes great responsibility, and that's exactly what Luke Cage had to learn in this episode, and unfortunately, he had to learn it the hard way. But it can only get crazier from here. The second episode of Luke Cage was fantastic. Not only is it building up the heroes and the villains, but it's doing so in an incredibly unique setting set within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm loving every minute of it. I'm still loving Mike Colter as Luke Cage. He's such a badass and so cool, and yet still such a caring person all at the same time. You really want to see him succeed. That's what's really great about his character. You want him to take the streets back, and we're gonna have to see what he's gonna do in the next couple of episodes. What I will say is I loved the second episode of the series a little bit more even than the first one. It's got a lot of riveting dialogue, and like I said in my previous review, it's a very slow burn when compared to, say, some of the other Marvel movies, and very similar to, say, Daredevil or Jessica Jones. It's going to take a little while for the show to sort of pick up its pace a little bit, but for what it's doing some great world building, and the characterizations are just fantastic. It also happens to have some pretty damn good cinematography and some great moments. Just little things. I really love the moment at the end of the episode after Cottonmouth just threw his goon over the side of the building. You could see the reflection of the red light actually coming up from below him, making him seem all the more devilish. And then in the next scene, he's in his office just crying. It really paints the villain as not just a simple black and white bad guy. And that's what I really love about this show. Not everything is just completely black and white, especially with the character of Luke fucking Cage. This was a great episode of Luke Cage. I'm giving this one right here a 5 out of 5. It was super solid, super relevant, and it gets me really excited for the next couple episodes of the series. So check it out, Luke Cage fans. Check it all out. If any of you guys did watch this episode, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. What did you think of the second episode of Luke Cage? Did you have a favorite scene from this episode? Were you saddened by the death of Pops? I know that I was. And what do you want to see from the rest of the brand new Netflix original series, Marvel's Luke Cage? Please tell me in the comment section below. You guys are awesome. Thank you for watching this review. I really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for all of our latest anime and manga reviews and all of my reviews of the Luke Cage Netflix original series. Make sure to like and comment and all that other YouTube jazz. Thank you guys again for watching. And as always, stay dandy, baby.